Welcome to CS Week Success Stories, second Tuesday at 2 p.m. Eastern webinar series. These webinars leading up to Conference 38 are the top-rated workshops from Conference 37 held last May in Tampa, Florida. I am John Sild, and I'm your moderator today, and I'm with CS Week. CS Week and Conference 38 will be held from May 5th through the 9th at the Henry B. Gonzalez Convention Center, San Antonio, Texas. Early registration is now open. This program will be recorded and available for playback, as are our other archived presentations found under the Educational Venues Second Tuesday link on our website. Today's program is The Magic of Setting Appointments, presented by Danielle Morrissey, Director of Customer Meter Service of Rhode Island, National Grid. Attendees are encouraged to upload your questions in the Q&A panel as they arise. However, all questions will be held until after the presentation for the Q&A segment. Danielle Morrissey has 25 years of experience with National Grid and the legacy companies, most recently as Rhode Island Director of Meter Service with a field staff of over 200 techs in both gas and electric meter work. Currently, she leads the meter-oriented service process team in the U.S., focused on improving appointments and results, as well as reducing non-productive field work. Danielle, we thank you for your time today, and we turn it over to you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. You can see the slides in front of you, I'm assuming, so I'll go through the presentation and I'll add a little bit of commentary and then answer questions in the end. So as John said, I work in Rhode Island, and managing the meter service department, we are the ones that go into the customers' homes to do anything to do with their meter, primarily giving them power, either electric or gas. So I work in Rhode Island, somewhat in Massachusetts, and we also, National Grid also has customers in New York, downstate and upstate New York. So in Rhode Island, we have over 480,000 electric customers and over 250,000 gas customers. So we have pretty much every electric customer in the state, as well as every gas customer. We have 17 unions, which any of you listening, if you work with unions, you know that comes with certain challenges. And we have, in Rhode Island, there's one regulatory body and different regulatory bodies in Massachusetts and in New York as well. So for the field workers that perform this work in Rhode Island, we do have over 200 workers that deal with appointments at the meter, and we have 20 dispatchers that work in Massachusetts, and they dispatch the work to our field workers through their computers in the trucks. So what is an appointment? And I'll refer back to being in utilities, different than some other for-profit type of companies. And I worked on multiple installations of appointment systems and field data capture systems, as well as dispatching systems. And we've had multiple customer information systems implemented here in Rhode Island as well. So I know how hard it is to roll out a system, and I've done it, I think, 4 times, and none of them were perfect, but we have had a lot of lessons learned. So when we're looking at appointments for us in Rhode Island, we have to work closely with the regulatory agency, but we offer 1-hour, 2-hour, 4-hour, 8-hour, and 12-hour appointment windows, depending on the type of work that customers are asking from us. We also have something recently with our most recent CIS system implementation called a commitment. And we added that commitment rule because when speaking with the Massachusetts and New York directors and their customer expectations, on the gas side of our industry, customers want shorter appointment windows. On the electric side, they don't need as small of a window. So an electric customer wouldn't need a 2-hour window because most of those meters are outside the house. so we had more flexibility, but we wanted to express that if a customer asked for us to do something on a Wednesday, for example, we showed up on the Wednesday, so we're calling those commitments. And what is considered missed? So if you are going to implement an appointment system, you probably want to think about the definition of a miss before you design the appointment windows and what are the implications. So again, in Rhode Island, the regulators pretty strictly define for us what is a miss. For example, if a customer has asked for a Tuesday afternoon appointment and I call them at 1 o'clock and say, we had an emergency, we won't be able to make this appointment, is it okay if I come on Wednesday, or is it okay if I come later on Tuesday? Even if the customer says, yes, that's okay, in our regulatory environment, that's still considered a missed appointment. So you want to know those things ahead of time. So for us, it's late by 5 minutes or more, and it's also considered late if we get there early and we're not able to complete the job. So we call that a UTC, or unable to complete. And that might be if the customer has an 8 to 12 appointment and the service tech arrives at the house at 7:30 and no one's home. We really shouldn't be doing that because the customer wasn't expecting us till 8. So if we closed that order, left, and did not return, that would be considered a missed appointment as well. As I said, the regulators are very much involved with the Rhode Island plan, our strategy for appointments. For the gas side, we pay penalties on an annual basis if we cannot get to 97.3% of our appointments on time. Other utilities at National Grid or other states at National Grid have different measures, different metrics, different penalties. And when we looked at other utilities across the country, it's scattered pretty well, the different metrics. So in Massachusetts, a penalty is paid to the customer directly if we miss an appointment. New York City does the same thing. We have to pay a penalty directly to the customer. None of our electric work is regulated to the point where we have to pay penalties. And in upstate, the regulation just recently changed this year. So they also will pay an appointment on a missed job. But in some of these areas, if they do call the customer and they call it renegotiate, the customer says it's okay if we can come at a different time, then they do not pay a penalty. So every regulator is different, and you need to know your tariff. So another thing to keep in mind if you're considering implementing an appointment system. Another thing that in Rhode Island the regulators have mandated for us is what we call a day's wait metric. And this comes from the regulators to measure our, one way of measuring our customer service, customer satisfaction. So they have said to us that we need to strive to never make a customer wait more than 3 days for work. In particular, they want to look at a turn-on, a gas turn-on or an electric turn-on. And they've said to us that we shouldn't make the customer wait more than 3 days, so we have to report on that. That is not the case in Massachusetts, nor is it the case in New York. Though internally, we actually had a meeting today to talk about what level of customer satisfaction are we looking to deliver, especially on the gas step. So if a customer is building a new property, they want to have gas, what is the longest that we would want them to wait for the meter to be turned on? So internally, the measure is 3, and I'll talk a little bit later about why isn't it 1. One piece of information that we get internally by looking at this 3-day wait is we would love to be able to give customers every job either today or tomorrow, but because of all the other work that's going on, we often can't do that. But once we hit that 3-day measure, once we know customers are waiting 3 days, that's when we know we really need to beef up the overtime that we're using to get this work done. If you're in the the gas industry, you know that it's very seasonal, and particularly for gas sets in the September, October, November timeframe in New England anyway, the construction season will start to wind down probably right after Thanksgiving. It's harder to get permits to put in new services in the ground, so everyone's rushing at the end of the year to get that work done. So we know that that is the season of the year where we'll have to use a lot of overtime to try to keep the level of customer satisfaction for these meter sets where we want it to be. So we're watching our budget, but at the same time trying to give the customers what they're looking for. So how do we balance all of the demands that we face in the utility industry? I call it a trilogy. I used to manage the dispatch office, and the contact center, those are the people talking to the customers directly on the phone when they're calling for an appointment. Dispatch, which that's the area here where we assign the work to the individual technicians, and then the field supervision. So we all need to be on the same page, and sometimes it's difficult to get everybody on the same page. We all can, at certain times of the year, have conflicting priorities. So the customer, the call center obviously wants to make the customer happy, and they would love to be able to give everyone the job today or tomorrow. That would be what would make the customer potentially most happy. But the dispatch office, we also have to manage emergency work. So every day we have to give ourselves a little extra time to make sure that we can respond immediately to our emergency jobs. Those response times are also regulated in Rhode Island. So communication is important. We have a lot of process teams together. We try to have the field visit dispatch and the call center and vice versa so that we can build relationships with each other so that there's not so much finger pointing going on. Because if the trilogy isn't really working, the idea of managing the appointment windows becomes even more difficult. So there's a lot of education going on. We need to keep the contact center aware of what our seasonal issues are, what our concerns are. If there's a lot of emergencies in the field, we need to be able to work with the contact center to ask customers to wait 3 days, maybe 4 days for work instead of getting it the next day. And the same could be true in the contact center. If we are making customers wait 4 days, let's say, and we haven't really used a lot of overtime, the contact center will call us and say, hey, we're getting a lot of complaints. Can you find ways to squeeze more work into the next 2 or 3 days? So when the communication is open, it works pretty well. Other stakeholders that we have to work with include the construction area. They're the ones that actually are digging in the ground and putting the mains in the ground. The collections, we do field collections for customers that don't pay their bill, so that drives a lot of extra work for us. And then obviously if the regulatory agencies get involved and say we need to focus on something different, we need to be able to rejuggle everything again. The partnership, this trilogy partnership starts, it should start as early in the process as possible. We try to centralize our resource planning. So one department isn't giving the field vacation when the contact center is saying that we're very busy and we need more work in the field. So that's important. We try to design shifts so that we can offer appointments in the windows that customers want them. And like I said, any kind of vacation planning or training, we need to try to seasonally adjust it for when we know our busy times will be during the year, or certain days of the week. Customers like Monday appointments, for example. So there is a lot of juggling every day going on. The field techs play a certain role in this trilogy. We want them to be committed. We want that to be part of their culture, that when they get an appointment, they need to pay attention and they need to get there on time. They need to know how to talk to customers. We, in Rhode Island, do not suggest the customers renegotiate appointments nor cancel them in the field. If they run out of work, we want them to call and ask for more work so that we can get more same-day work out to customers, which makes them happy. If we are running behind or we had a lot of emergencies In some of our contracts, we're allowed to actually force the workers to stay until all the appointment work is complete. If it's work that the customer isn't staying home waiting for, it's something, let's say it's an electric meter shut off and the customer's already moved, the meter's outside. If we can't get to it one day, we can do it the next day. That doesn't really hurt anybody. If a customer down the street or an individual down the street says they see a field tech working, turning on a meter at one house, would you allow that tech to then take on this extra work? So that's something that you have to work through in your culture, in your system. If every day everybody goes out with a full day's worth of work, you can't really allow them to add an extra job onto their day because it'll disrupt all the other work that's already been promised. Where you may be in an area where you're not that busy, and that extra customer, as long as they called and got an order, you'd be willing to serve that customer. So that's something that you need to build into your field culture. We do find certain areas the more flexibility you give the field, you're giving away some control away from dispatch, and that can be tricky, where if you have a lot of penalties like you do in Rhode Island, we tend to give less flexibility to the field tech and centralize it within our dispatch office. When do you need an appointment? And this is important when you're educating the call center. If the meter is inside, especially for gas, not for electric so much, if the customer has to be home waiting for us, then we need an appointment because we don't want to make the customer wait there all day. If it's an outside meter and the customer just wants us to turn it off, then we don't really need an appointment. We don't want the customer to wait all day for something that we can just drive by and take 5 minutes to do. So you don't want to get customers angry by making them wait when you don't need to. So it's important that the contact center has all the information they need to make the right choice whether that customer needs an appointment or not. And in some utilities I've seen where certain appointments take priority over another. For us in Rhode Island, an appointment for a shutoff is the same as an appointment for a turn-on. Again, because we've made that customer wait, they may have taken time out of work. So they're all equal. We try to get them all. You need to audit yourself so that you know you're meeting your own expectations. So one thing that we do with the contact center is we have that communication audited. Are they asking for the location of the meter? Does the CIS system have information on the meter? Are they instructing the customer about their responsibilities? The customer needs to be able to provide access to the meter. For the gas appointments, they need to be able to provide access to the equipment. It needs to be a safe pathway. We hope that it's a clean pathway. Animals should be locked up if there's dogs and things like that. So we count on the contact center to tell those customers that up front. The field tech, in our system, we've given everyone cell phones, and we have asked them, I refer to like having a couch delivered. If you call them, you buy a couch and you want it delivered. The store, we usually say, we'll call you the night before to remind you, and we'll call you that day when we're on our way. We're trying to do the same thing here with the appointment. And when that field tech calls that customer, are they, again, asking them, because sometimes you're talking to the tenant and not the landlord, can you get me access to that meter? Can you get me access to all the equipment? Because if we get there and the meter or the equipment is locked in the basement, we can't complete the job. So the field tech, we're trying to train them to ask the right questions so we don't waste time driving. We all at National Grid, all the directors have process teams that we belong to, and a lot of our time is spent, my process team anyway, talking about appointments. How do we minimize missed appointments, and how do we minimize the unable to complete? In some jurisdictions, we're allowed to actually charge the customer. So if the customer has made an appointment and then they're not there, we're able to put a charge on their bill. That's not true in all of our areas, though. And then, of course, you want reporting. You want to know, how am I doing today? How did I do this week? How did these individuals do? Or how am I doing on certain jobs? We put a heightened attention on meter turn-ons. People that don't have power, obviously. We want to make sure that they get power when they ask for it. So we want to look at, are we meeting those appointments? Are there reasons why we're not meeting them? Are there reasons why we get there and we can't complete the job? Or are there certain technicians who tend to miss a lot of appointments, or a certain town that maybe we miss a lot of appointments in that area? Certain systems that you can look at will give you minute buckets. We call them buckets or calendars, where you can control all of your buckets by city or town, but that requires a lot of maintenance because you have to either adjust the number of jobs or the number of minutes that you have available by town. We've chosen Rhode Island's a small state, and we only have broken it up into 2 physical areas, but other locations within National Grid have made it much more finite, so you could debate either way there, but I tend to like the way that's easier to administer, and then we move the people to where the work is versus limiting the work to certain towns. Technical challenges, we do because we were multiple companies and then purchased by National Grid. We still have multiple CIS systems, multiple dispatching systems, different appointment engines, and the way we complete orders, the data that's captured in different regulatory areas is different. So when we try to apply one standard to this appointment setting concept, we definitely come up against some challenges. One thing that we added in the most recent Rhode Island implementation was previously a call center rep had the ability to overbook a system. So if we in dispatch in the field said, for example, we only want to take 300 jobs today, and the contact center had a customer that was giving them a hard time and they wanted to force a job through, they used to be able to do that. We stopped that. So that's impossible to do now, except if you're a supervisor and it's an emergency job. And in the contact center person's mind, what is one job? What difference does it make? But if you're a good schedule builder and you know how many techs you have and how much work you can do, adding one more means you immediately have missed your target. You immediately have missed appointments. So we are not very tolerant at all of that unless there's really some type of an emergency going on. So that would be something to consider as well if you're looking at a new system. Of course, when you're thinking about putting in a system or designing some processes, you really want to know what does the customer want from you as a utility. And we have to admit that we don't exactly know. We don't have a way. If a customer calls today and they ask, I would love to have an appointment Saturday morning, and we say, I'm sorry, we don't have time on Saturday morning, I can do it Saturday afternoon or I could do it Friday, we don't have a way in our current systems to capture that really the first desire was to have that Saturday morning appointment. We're trying to find ways to capture that, but we have not done that yet. We did do a study that showed customers would be happy with a 3-hour appointment window. Some people think customers would insist on having a 1-hour appointment window. We didn't find that to be true, which is good for us. And the system that we had doesn't accommodate a 3-hour appointment window, so we're still at 2-hour, 4-hour, 8-hour appointment windows. And actually in Rhode Island, we don't even offer the 2-hour, but it is offered in New York, and they charge the customer extra to get that 2-hour and 1-hour appointment window, the smaller windows. There is a cost to those smaller windows. So if you've ever worked in dispatch, you would know that if every tech has a job that they can do anytime in an 8-hour day, then it's simple. You can just take out some GPS-type software and they can drive in the most straight line from one job to the next. But what happens when you start offering appointment windows, you could have 2 jobs on the same street. One is a morning and one is an afternoon, and you can't do them within the chronological order. You would have to drive to all your AMs and then come back to that street and do the PMs, for example. Or you may have more than one technician working in one town, and they're going to be crisscrossing each other all morning to try to grab all the morning work and then go to their afternoon work instead of just driving the shortest number of miles. So you do have to consider that. You have to balance what you think the customer wants and what you're really able to, from a cost perspective, what are you able to provide. And if it's a gas utility instead of an electric utility, depending on how you offer your appointments and depending on how you handle your gas emergencies, some utilities will take a pool of people and they'll respond only to gas emergencies and the rest will do appointments. In Rhode Island, we don't do that. We spread the work out. So if we know that a person can do approximately 360 minutes of productive work in a day, because you figure in the morning they stock their truck, at the end of the day they take stock out, they drive, they have lunch, they have breaks. It's somewhere between 300 and 360 minutes of work every day. A certain amount of that time has to be set aside to handle emergencies. So we don't want to schedule so many appointments that the tech can't get to the emergencies. So that's a little bit of an art there. And then there's always the regulators who may throw work at you that you're not expecting. So we probably schedule 70% of a person's day, and the other 30% is left there for emergencies. And then when you don't have the emergencies, there's a cost. You're paying someone that's not productive. So it's a daily juggle. Some days we do end up overbooked. If more people call out sick than we anticipate, for example, or the weather gets bad and we weren't expecting it, so we may have scheduled everyone for a 70% productive day, and that day they're really only 50% productive, so now we're overbooked. What do you do? If it is commitments from customers, even though we know we're going to miss those appointments, we need to do the work anyway. So if we were really doing our job, we would call those customers and say, I'm sorry, we're late, we're going to get there though, and then we would hire overtime for that day. Different utilities, different areas that I've seen have done different things. Some don't use overtime. They just call the customers and they reschedule for another day. So that is a question that you need to ask yourself again before you design your system or your processes. Some dispatch offices will call customers for you. Sometimes I've seen the field techs doing it themselves, and other times we hand the work back to the contact center and then they have to call the customer and reschedule, which of course is awkward for them because the customer isn't going to be happy. And the call center is measured here at least on how many calls they take in, not so much how many they call out. So if they have to put people in that seat to reschedule, they're taking fewer calls into the center. So again, we try to get at least 97% of our appointments completed every day. When you're thinking about designing your system in a utility world, the challenge, like I said, one of the challenges is the union and the shifts that your contracts may allow. Some are flexible when it comes to shifts and some are not. So you really need to think about that. How productive are people at night and weekends versus during the day? Do you have shift supervisors? There's a lot of questions that you need to ask yourself. In your area, are you willing or able to do work on Sundays? Some customer groups we find definitely not, and other customers are used to it. So it's funny when you go from region to region, you will see that there's a field worker culture and there's actually a customer culture as well. One thing that I would personally like to see is for customers to be able to schedule their own appointments through the internet. I have seen vendors offer that. Our current system does not offer that, but it seems like you would relieve a lot of traffic from the call center, and I think empowering customers that way is a good thing. So I'd be curious to hear if anybody has implemented that at their utilities. So that is the presentation that I gave at the conference and updated with a little bit more current information. I want to thank everyone that dialed in, and now I would be willing to take some questions.
Well, we have a few questions for you, Danielle. That's a great presentation. It's always just informative to look in someone else's playbook and allow us to get your ideas and how other people are doing things. So we appreciate your willingness to share with us today on all this. The first question I have is, are there cultural challenges to offering customer appointments in a utility world?
Yes, there's definitely cultural challenges. I remember when we first started doing it at National Grid, it was on the gas side of the business, and the regulators had asked us to consider offering appointments, and they didn't really mandate exactly how we had to do it. They just asked us to consider it. So I was part of the team that did that, and when we went to discuss with the field workers, this was probably 15 or so years ago, we said we're going to offer appointments, so you need to pay attention to the times and get there within the window that we promised the customer. And some of the workers who at the time, they were all men, they said to me, well, all the wives are at home waiting anyway, so what difference does it make? So coming from that culture as a utility that we're here, we're a monopoly, and customers will just wait for us, that's taken a long time to turn around. I think people are much more aware of it now with the world, with both people at home working, and now a lot of our field workers, spouses are working as well. So it does take a while for that to get ingrained into people. And like I said, you won't be really successful unless the field techs believe that that's the best way to help customers. And it takes a couple years for that to happen if you haven't done that already.
Okay. Your next question is, are you leveraging your mobile operation systems to assign the appointments the most efficient way?
Right now, the field, the techs will see the appointment windows themselves, and the dispatchers have the ability to route the work for them. The field tech has the ability to reroute the work, and so it's not technically the most efficient from a miles-driven point of view, and one of the reasons is because we have a process where we have to call before. So the tech is instructed, call the customer to say that you're on your way. If they don't answer, leave a message, call the next appointment, and then when you finish that other appointment, you need to call the first one again. And if they don't answer a second time, then you can close out the order because we are trying to save driving miles. So we're not following a strict, straight line kind of process.
Okay, okay. And when you are working through your schedule, your capacity planning, how do you work through that and figure out your team sizes?
That's a lot of work. The resource planning, I'll call that. I think that's what that question is going to. So at the beginning of the year, we will project how much work we think we'll do the next year. And I guess that's one good thing in the utility industry is that your workloads are fairly consistent, and the seasonality of your work is pretty predictable. Because it's on the gas side, we have the gas odor complaints, emergency calls, but which you would think would be random, but statistically when we look at them, they're not. They're fairly predictable, shockingly predictable. So we can put that into a seasonal model. The electric work is pretty straight across the board unless you have a hurricane. And then you have the mandated work. So you need to know ahead of time, is there anything coming from your regulator where they're going to say you have to do certain inspections certain times of the year, for example, or meter changes. That's something we're mandated to do, but we can do it any month of the year. If the company's having a marketing campaign where you think you may have a lot of growth, we know we have to get that done within the construction season. So we'll do the annual forecast. We break it into a monthly forecast. And then certain seasons, we will even go down to a weekly forecast. And that's how we will determine how many workers that we need. Because we do collections work, we shut off for non-payment, but then when they pay, you have to turn them back on the next day. that creates a very heavy workload in that season, which is May to October. And because that is so cyclical, we try to use temporary resources for that type of work, and that tends to be actually non-appointment work. So it's multi-layer. You have to look at it almost every day. I want to say we have one resource that looks at that daily balancing literally every day, if not multiple times a day. So it's a very important role to making sure you meet your appointments.
Oh, absolutely. All right, your next question is, do you offer same-day appointments for gas or for things such as no heat?
We no longer do appliance work. We used to do appliance work, and that went away maybe 8 years ago. But we do offer same day. We don't call them appointments. So we will, if you call in the morning and we have time available, we will tell you we will be there today. But we will not offer you a appointment window. We won't say we'll be there between 2 and 4 or between 4 and 8. We'll just tell you we'll be there today. And again, in the season where we do shut off our non-payment, we are mandated to do that. So those two items could challenge each other, just a straight customer calling because they moved and they want their service turned on, and also a customer who just paid their bill.
Okay. Describe how, if a customer changes their appointment in that day and they want to move to another day, how does that impact your field ops?
It does impact the field ops. We don't see that happening a lot. So the CIS system that we have, the contact center person would talk to the customer, cancel the order, reschedule it for another day, and luckily it flows right through dispatch into the field. No one has to touch it, but the field tech needs to be paying attention, and that order would disappear from their screen. So we do find that some field techs like to write down their orders off of their computer, so it could happen that they could drive there by mistake. Hopefully it wasn't a meter shut-off order that was canceled, but the system handles it pretty well, and we try to keep a pool of work that is unscheduled so that if, for example, we had a lot of cancellations for a day, we could give the field tech work that is non-customer driven, and certain kinds of mandated work that we would give them to fill their day.
Okay. Let's go back to the basics. What are the first steps a company should take when considering offering appointments?
Well, if possible, I think it would be a good idea to poll your customers somehow, some sort of survey to see what they wanted. We did talk to one utility before we started who they were convinced that their customer wanted these 1-hour appointment windows, so they went and spent a lot of money on a certain system, and they hired a lot of people, assuming that's what the customers wanted, and then it turned out really that wasn't the level of service that they were expecting, and in some cases they didn't want the appointments to be that rigid for themselves. So you know, that wasn't good for their budget. So if possible, find out from your customers what they want, and then really think about how much money you're willing to spend to meet that customer demand. If you make a commitment to do X and then you commit to do the best you can against that target of X, that may be, as a utility, more realistic, especially on the gas side, because you know the emergency work can disrupt a day very easily.
Okay. Do you have any stats on you can't get in for a gas turn on at all that you can share with us?
We did, yes, I do. It's different regionally. Now, Rhode Island, so I'll speak about Rhode Island, Mass, and New York. So in Rhode Island, we've been measuring these unable to complete for probably 10 or 12 years. So culturally, the field techs seem to understand that that's not satisfactory, that you don't try as best as you can to get this work done. So we expect them to knock on all the doors. We expect them to call the customer. We expect them, we're allowed to go into certain common spaces even if no one's there. So the UTC rate for Rhode Island gas is about 14%. It's higher in New York and Massachusetts, and we measure downstate New York City differently than upstate New York. So in downstate, there's a lot of apartment buildings where you just can't get in, period. There's no multiple doors to try, but we try to get them to knock on other people's doors. But those rates are closer to 16 or 18% in New York and Massachusetts.
Okay, great. Okay, where in the process should you contact a vendor regarding an appointment system for your CIS system?
Well, I would suggest that internally you have teams of people, the stakeholders, the contact center, dispatch the field, and as a group decide what do you think you want before you bring a vendor in, because oftentimes the vendor will say, we can do this, we can do that, have you ever thought of this, have you ever thought of that, and they may make your head spin a little bit because it looks, exciting or a sexy system that can do all these things that really you had never even considered doing. So I think you have to understand the core of what you really want before you bring that vendor in. Certainly listen to suggestions because maybe they've learned something from another utility that you hadn't thought of. But if your premise is really offering appointments, let's say, only for turn-ons, or is it that you want to offer appointments for all your work? Is this something where you want to guarantee 2-hour appointments, or you just want to be able to manage your work on a day-to-day basis? You should go into that vendor meeting knowing what your priorities are and have a good idea of what your budget is.
Okay. Can you tell me how many appointments would be assigned to a tech on an average day?
For gas tech, depending on what kind of work it is, on an average we say 8. So in Rhode Island, you should be able to do 8 turn-ons in a day, twice as many shut-offs, but we tend to mix all the work around. So generally speaking, on gas it's 8. On electric, it's probably somewhere around 20 because of that work generally in Rhode Island. On the gas side, we have about 60% of the meters inside. On the electric side, virtually all meters are outside, so you can go and do the work. You don't need to even talk to the customer on the electric work, so they can do many more jobs.
Okay. In what situation would you allow an override of the appointment system?
I would only allow an override when it's a real emergency and when the contact center supervisor, dispatch supervisor approve it. Sometimes we find the regulators will call and force us to take a certain job for political reasons or for health reasons. But other than that, if your day is full, you have to remember that if you're going to force one more job in, that means some other customer isn't going to get the service that they expected. So we avoid it as much as possible.
Gotcha. All right. Well, Danielle, this was a great presentation. We thank you for sharing with us your 25 years of experience. And if your question was not answered, we had so many questions come in. If your question was not answered, email Denise Mullendor with the CS Week office, and we'll forward those questions on to Danielle. We'll get those answered and back to you. Please join us in February for our next webinar entitled Canadian Smart Meter Programs, presented by Toronto Hydro and BC Hydro. Also, I want to remind you, early registration is now open for CS Week in San Antonio, May 5th through the 9th, so sign up today. We thank you attendees for being on our webinar, and this would conclude our webinar for today.